What's happening? Cory Wong here with the brand new Wong Notes podcast, Season 1, Episode 1. You're in on the ground floor, as people say, who are trying to get you to invest in their company or something. But we're not asking anything from you other than to sit back and enjoy these conversations with legends. I'm excited because today we got Joe Satriani. Some people call him Satch. Your parents probably know him from Surfing with the Alien. That's how I know him. My dad had that CD in the house when I was growing up. It's a classic, a must-own for any guitar heads. Well, that was decades ago, and Joe Satriani has been putting out great records ever since. He's been putting together things like G3. He's one of the main ambassadors for the instrument in the last couple decades, and just a straight-up guitar player's guitar player. He's also known as being an insane teacher. Hold on a minute. Check out this list. We're talking Kirk Hammett from Metallica. You got Steve Vai. Who's Steve Vai? You've got Charlie Hunter, one of the most original and interesting guitar players of our time. Larry Lalonde from Primus. I even heard that he was a guitar teacher to the guy from Counting Crows and the guitar player of Third Eye Blind. Do you know how awesome Joe Satriani is? I do. Dang it. If I only had him as a mentor, I'd be having hit songs since I was 20. Well, I don't think that's actually how it is. And he gets into that. He gets into the thing. He talks about his teaching, talks about his students. Funny little Charlie Hunter story in there. You know what? I'm ready to get this thing going. Let's do it. All right, we're all in search of gear all the time because we're guitar players. We like gear. Okay, musicians in general. They call it GAS, gear acquisition syndrome, if you will. Now, let's say you're a little gassy. Okay, sorry, that was bad. But I had to. I got one product I want to suggest. A Stratocaster. Now, hey. Come on, that seems like the most basic suggestion. But I'll tell you what. Fender's making some dope instruments right now. I've been playing a Highway 1 Stratocaster for the last, I don't know how many years. But I did get this new American Ultra Series guitar. It's really awesome. I mean, it just is. And I wouldn't be telling you this unless I actually thought so. You probably seen me on their little ads. They're popping up in your algorithm, which I can make an educated guess on because you're listening to a guitar podcast. So there you go. And I'm not the kind of guy who normally uses a humbucker in the bridge, but this guitar, the humbucker is amazing. It's got this coil tap system where you coil tap it and it splits into a single coil, but it doesn't do that thing that a lot of other coil taps do where it just gets quieter and thinner because it's gone from a humbucker to a single coil. It's got something built into it where it compensates for that, which I love. The other pickups are the ultra noiseless pickups, which are great for session work because you're not getting all the buzz and noise in the background, and especially when you're just playing quiet. Or if I'm on stage and I don't turn my volume off, I don't get all the same amp buzz because of the lights around or whatever. Great pickups, classic Strat tone, bubbly warm top end. It's got the bite, it's got the power. That Strat is dope. Great guitar. Check them out. They got, if you play bass, hey, tell you what, you better believe I got that Ultra J bass to get my Jocko Rocco on, thumping away these 16ths. Okay, anyway, speaking of Rocco, San Francisco, Bay Area, let's hit this Satriani interview. Hey, Joe, thanks so much for being with us today. First off, I got a copy of your new record, and I am digging it.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much.
Of course. Well, I play guitar on The Late Show with Colbert a fair amount, and I was on there a few months ago, and Chris Chaney was on with Perry Farrell talking about this record, either like just going right away to record it or he just got done recording it. Either way, he was stoked about recording it. I was excited to hear it.
Oh, Chris is amazing. You know, he's one of those guys that I can't think of very many bass players who have the ability to really follow directions to the T, but also to offer up a million different alternatives. He can play the craziest music. The most conservative approach is as easy for him as the most unorthodox. He always comes with the right gear. And of course, he's an exceptional human being, which really helps, when you're in the studio working really hard, He's got some crazy ideas about how to stay healthy, which is always
totally
part of what, just having him show us all the crazy planks that he does every day to keep so fit is scary, but he knows how to rock out, which is why I like to have him in the session.
Yeah, and it's funny because he's got such a wisdom about it, but he's one of those cats that just has nothing to prove. He knows he's great. He's going to play the appropriate and the right thing. It's cool. It's fun to watch him do that.
And it's always better too. It's an interesting process. You're in the studio. Your emotions are running high. If you're the guy running the show, there's all that extra anxiety about the entire project, let alone what's happening minute to minute.
Yeah.
And you need someone who can be crazy, but also has a very cool head about him that, can keep track of what's actually happening. And everything that he offered up turned out to be the right thing in the end. And that's why I brought him back, because we did the Unstoppable Momentum record together, and he really impressed me with that ability of just always doing the right thing. And you may not notice it at the moment, but at the end of the day or 3 weeks later when you do an overdubs, you go, oh, that's why he did it like that, because it works.
It's funny. I actually feel that sometimes when I play live with certain drummers, I think, oh man, I want more energy. I want more subdivision. And then I listen back to the recording and realize, like, no, the drummer had exactly the right energy and subdivision we needed. It was just like in the moment, it felt like, but I just trusted that, like, yeah, you did what was right. And listening back, oh, sure enough, it was right.
That's funny. You say subdivision. I immediately think of playing with Marco Miniman, who is such an advanced human being when it comes to subdividing. And boy, fasten your seatbelt. If you give him just an inkling that that you're going to allow him to go subdivision crazy, good luck trying to follow where he is. He's got such a joyous approach to playing music. He's just like a little kid, and he just happens to be like a mathematical genius in his brain when it comes to handling time. It just nothing phases him. It's crazy. And for someone a little bit more challenged like myself, still counting on his fingers, it's like, oh my God, it's exhilarating, but I've got to be prepared for it,
So sometimes playing with musicians, or especially drummers like that, if their groove is insane, if their time is insane, if their subdivision is insane, there's kind of one of two ways it can go. It's either like, there's nothing I can do to mess up the pocket. I can play anything and it's still going to feel great, and it's still going to just be awesome. There's drummers like Michael Bland or Omar Hakim that are like that. And then there's like times where there's so much happening. I don't know. I feel like I'm always on edge. I feel like I'm just playing on a house of cards. Right? At any moment, I could just be completely off. Is it? What is that? What's that like for you in that situation?
The thing about time is it's experienced by everybody differently at the same time, and it's a funny thing. You're playing. Let's say you got a part. You've thought about this part. You're expecting something to happen, and this expectation is what can hold you back sometimes with what's happening with the groove. You run on stage, let's say, to start a song, and you might be excited. You may be a little slowed down because you had a burrito before the show. I don't know. Maybe you had a couple of shots of tequila and you're just racing. The drummer, perhaps, in the most perfect physical space possible for the show, maybe doesn't care about the audience. Who knows where the bass player's hat is at, and so everyone starts to play this groove at a different spot. Mm-hmm. And then you got people in the audience that are in, every single person is in a different location in the audience, so they're hearing a different mix. So when you step back and you look at it, like if you were hovering over the scene in a club and you're watching this thing unfold itself, you say, well, this is, as musicians, we say, well, you can play on the beat, ahead of the beat, behind the beat, whatever, mm-hmm. and these are your parts. But actually, it's deeper than that. I think it's more human than that. It's more, it's unbelievably fractured and complex. And there's no way to actually define definitively like what the groove is, because everybody's experiencing it and hearing it in a different way. So with that in mind, and I walk on stage, I realize I know I'm going to feel this different than everybody else in the band because I'm different. I'm feeling different right now. I did different things. And the person sitting in the back where there's a bass bump at 100 hertz that's out of control, they're hearing something entirely different than my guitar tech who's standing on the side of the stage looking at me thinking, why is Joe playing like that? You know?
Yeah.
It makes me think sometimes that like you, not to get too hung up on the intricacies of what you expected, but you just got to be live. You just got to be so present and just go with what's happening. And don't, as I learned from Lenny Tristano many years ago, don't be judgmental when you're playing. You just got to be.
Living in the moment.
Yes.
So do you compensate knowing that? Do you rely more on the moment or rely more on, I know that my instincts are this, I know that 120 BPM is this, but my heart is racing, so I'm going to control it? Or is your method, and I'm sure it's different each time, but do you think more about what you know is to be right? And I say right in quotations.
Yeah. I think about the moment because I know that right before I step on stage, my whole body is saying, don't go out there, whatever you do. I'm petrified. I'm not a front person. And I'm more comfortable sitting in my studio with the guitar than I am standing in front of an audience. And then once I step out there, some other, beast comes out of my personality. And but I've learned over the years, trust the drummer. You know, because I'm all amped up. I just went through this weird, 2-second catharsis of personality where I went from introvert to extrovert. So where do I know, where things are really supposed to sit? So I just listen to everybody, make sure I'm fitting in with everybody. And it always turns out to be the right thing.
You brought up something kind of like changing your persona when you get on stage. I know a lot of people have a certain outfit they wear that's like the Superman thing, where it's like, all right, I know when Superman puts on the outfit, he's Superman. But until then, he's not. And for you, I recognize you as a personality. I recognize your persona with the shades, with the black shirt, with that specific guitar, the shaved head. It feels like your persona, your artist profile, who you are, what you like put out as your character is very intentional and thought out. But it also seems as if maybe, and correct me if I'm wrong, but starting to see that shift from like after 1995, after the self-titled album, it's like that's where all of a sudden there's a change in look and even a little bit change in sound and a change in feel. Is that intentional? Can you speak to because you have, some level of fear of going out on stage. Some people would call it stage fright. That might be an overdramatic term, whatever it is for you. Do you feel like you have do you feel like you assume that persona and it empowers you to go out, or where did that all come from for you?
Well, it's really, much funnier than what people might imagine. The hair thing was pretty obvious. I was losing my hair, and I had to come up with something that I could manage just on a personal level.
All right.
And it came as a whim. I was jogging, the hair was bothering me. I stopped at a corner. I live in San Francisco, so it's an urban environment. There, Walgreens is having a sale on a clipper. I go and I buy it. I go home, I shave half of my head, and then I call my wife and my son into the bathroom, and they say, "Hey, check this out." And they're looking at me like, "Well, you look normal." And then I turn to the other side, and I'm all shaved, and it was just a funny family moment. But I realized like I'm going through with this, So about a week later, I wound up doing the first show with the band, and I show up at the sound check, and I'm wearing a hat and sunglasses. No one's thinking anything different. And then when I take it off, of course, they're all like shielding their eyes, saying, "Oh my God, that is the most awful thing ever. Put the hat back on, or wear the glasses or something." And it became like a joke. And so when I walked out on stage that night, I put the hat and the glasses on, just as a joke. I'd never done that ever before. And I noticed that there was a change in the audience. They just suddenly took me more seriously, perhaps, or thought I was more mysterious than I was. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, it's kind of warm, so I got rid of the hat, but I thought the glasses are kind of cool. You know, you don't have to squint your eyes so much, and it's kind of interesting. And so I just kind of went with it. But it started out, it was because I horrified, Stu and Jonathan, and I was doing them a favor by softening the look, But then also personally, it's like I was never thinking like, I was going to get a wig, or I was going to, I was just thinking like, I just have to be Joe. That's it. That's just the way I am always. And so I'm not going to get involved in anything more complicated than that. So that became easy. I think it's a coincidence, I think, that the sound started to change. The 90s were crazy for someone who put out records in the 80s anyway. Yeah. When it comes to guitar. I put out The Extremist, which was my love letter to classic rock at exactly the wrong moment when grunge was taking off. So, but it turned out to be a great thing to do. It just sort of distanced me from what was happening. Although economically it was kind of hard to get noticed while all this other stuff was happening. So, the 90s were wonderfully cathartic in that way, because it kept making all musicians, especially guitar players, really re-examine what it is they liked, what it is they really wanted to do, what was really authentically them, and what was just stuff they were doing to keep working. So I had the luxury of being able to do what I wanted to do, so I just kept doing that.
I love that. Since we're kind of on the topic of being Joe, being who you are, your artistry, your persona, when I hear, I see you get lumped in with a lot of other musicians, a lot of other guitar players. You're a guitar player's guitar player, but you seem to transcend that, and it's beyond that. You have a much more unique voice. You have a thing to you. You can tell your influence. I can tell when I listen the lineage of some of the jazz harmony. I can hear some of the Hendrix and blues thing that feels pretty obvious. I can hear a lot of the R&B and rhythm side of things, and maybe that's a Bay Area influence in some way, just from one of my favorite bands, Tower of Power, knowing they're from the similar area. But it seems like there's so much influence that you've taken. What to you is what defines your voice on the instrument? You've got a lyrical way of playing. You play very technical, but there's so much more to it than that. When I listen to your new record, Shapeshifter, there's great rhythm. There's great parts to your records. There's great intentionality. It's more than just, hey, I can play fast, which I think some people lump guitar players into that category. What defines to you, like in your words, how would you describe your voice on the instrument and who you are? When somebody says, give me the Joe Satriani thing, what is that to you?
Well, first of all, I'm immune to it. When people say, give me that Joe Satriani thing, I don't know what that is. I'm just being me. I can tell you that, growing up with parents who were jazz-age kids and loved listening to jazz, I heard that all the time. I heard classical music all the time growing up. Youngest of 5 kids, so my older siblings lived the late 50s, all of the 60s, full tilt. And when they left the house, they left the records. And so that became my background. And my influences are just right there for everybody to see. It's so obvious, I like to celebrate the guitar. I like to celebrate my influences. I like playing things on the guitar that are very guitar-like, that's kind of like the hallmark of what you do as well. It's very guitar-like. It's stuff you can do on guitar. It's fun to do on guitar. So you might as well just focus on it, let the horn players do the horn bits and the bass do the bass bit, so I know it's attractive sometimes or exciting to chase after other things, but I've always leaned back on letting the composition push the guitar technique to where it needs to go to make the song happen. And in the additional sort of umbrella approach would be to make sure it sounds like a guy playing a guitar and not something else, because then that's pointless.
Sure.
And so those two things together, they kind of remind me of Hendrix in a way. I mean, to me, when I listened to Hendrix records, every song was different. He never sort of like promoted his technique. He just played. I mean, it's just really crazy. That whole like know me for my technique kind of thing came a lot later. It may have been in jazz and I missed it because I'm not a jazz. I'm just a rock and roll age kid, you know. Yeah. But the players that I grew up loving were so unique and different, from Hendrix to Iommi, Wes Montgomery, Billy Bauer. I mean, they were just so odd when you think about it. Yeah. Alan Holdsworth, I mean, he's such an odd character, but so brilliant at the same time. But their compositions and their compositional desires, I guess, especially with somebody like Alan Holdsworth, that pushed him to have to develop a way of playing, because he just had to play those chords. He had to try to step up to Coltrane's, legend and try to and celebrate it,
And with interesting guitar technique too, with so much left hand and legato.
So beautiful. I mean,
yeah.
I remember seeing him at a small club on Long Island when I was a teenager, a place called My Father's Place in Roslyn, Long Island. Yeah. And he was on that tour with Tony Williams, Alan Pasqua, and I forget who was playing bass that night. And there he is with the SG and the Marshall with one of the cabinets facing the wall, probably a 50-watt 71 Marshall, and he had a small stone face shifter. I mean, it was as raw as you can get in a club that holds like 65 people. And it must have been such a bummer gig for those guys. But for me, this, 15-year-old kid in the audience, it was heaven. It was like heaven from another galaxy. I just couldn't believe somebody could play that set of gear like that and make it sound so beautiful, just cascading legato technique, all the notes that I heard on the record. But it was still raw, and because of when I was born and everything, it had to sound like rock for me to like it, I loved it, there were so many moments in my life where the moment reaffirmed my love of music and musicianship and the rawness of rock and roll, and how it includes all different styles and techniques. And it seems to have no barriers to it, I still love that.
All right, folks, this is a fun conversation. We got to pause for a second. I told you about the Stratocaster at the beginning of this episode. Now I'm here to tell you about that American Ultra Telecaster. That thing is dope. All the bite, all the crunch, everything that you want from rock to country. I use a Tele for that Prince rhythm sound. It's great, and the American Ultra right now is my axe of choice. Okay, let's get back to it. You've been known to be a great teacher, and speaking of artistic voice and just like finding your thing, the first I heard of the legend of Joe Satriani as a teacher and why it was a good idea to have Joe as a teacher was from my friend Charlie Hunter. Charlie told me that he had some experience with you when he was on the scene. He was like, if you want to figure out your thing, get with Joe. And he speaks very highly of you as a teacher. And when I look at the list of many of your students or understudies, whatever you want to call apprentices, I don't know, whatever you want to call them, people that you've been able to give advice to on the guitar. There's so many interesting players. There's Charlie Hunter, who has such a unique voice on the instrument and something very specific. Steve Vai, who has a specific, interesting voice on the instrument. Larry Lalonde from Primus, who has such a sound and such a thing to the way that he plays. Kirk Hammett from Metallica. There's so many people that you have been a teacher to that have, to me, such iconic voices on the guitar. And beyond just guitar, just music in general, it feels like they have been able to also make a fingerprint on music And I think that's probably a testament to the way that you approach music and the way that you teach it to others. What's the secret, Joe?
Well, first of all, you have to be lucky enough to have like brilliant kids walk into your door. I mean, God, I mean, how can I possibly figure out and explain that I grew up in the same town with Steve Vai, that we had the same music theory teacher in high school in a little public school in a teeny little town. And we were both just crazy Italian American kids who wanted to be rock stars. I mean, it's just so random. I mean, Charlie's story is so funny because I knew his mother because she was a luthier who worked at the store. The only reason why I was teaching at that guitar store was because I lived across the street. I never bought anything at the store, but the owner got so upset with me, he basically convinced me I should teach. So, I'd have some money to buy something there, And I was really trying not to go back to guitar teaching. I just really wanted to get a gig that would pay the bills better, But so anyway, one day Jane comes in and she goes, "Oh my God, Joe, will you do something with Charlie? He's driving me crazy," So that's my introduction to little Charlie. But of course, he was a joy because he was just 100% talent all the time.
Yeah.
Couldn't contain him, And very much like Steve Vai in that he was very motivated, even though they may not have been able to express it, intellectually at their young age. Because I met Steve when he was 12. But you could tell right away that they just had the power, the energy, and the talent within them to really do something, to go somewhere. They knew what they wanted, which was so important, because it's hard to play, it's hard to be great, easy to be good, but it's really hard to be great. But these guys were destined to be great. So I think part of the secret is you got to figure out what they're good at, what's pointless to try to make them practice. Like if they're not, fast scurriers across the fretboard, just don't bother with that stuff, and so on and so forth. If someone really wants to do vibrato without grabbing the neck, don't try to force them to change their vibrato. Just let them develop it on their own. I think the most important thing is don't change them, is don't make them ever play like you, is you have to somehow lead them to themselves. There's such a big pressure for young kids to be like everybody else. It's like nobody wants to be different, right? That just comes later. And for some reason, we hit our 20s and we just want to be individuals. But when you're 12, when you're 14, you're 16, you just really want to fit in with the group that you identify with. Having spent 10 years sitting in a small room at a guitar store, teaching kids that are as young as 8 and grown-ups that were older than me, in their 60s, I got to see a slice of humanity. It was quite interesting, and there's a lot of psychology that goes into it. But young people are absolutely amazing. It's just like a miracle when they walk in the door, and you're looking at somebody like a Kirk Hammett or an Alex Skolnick, and you can just tell they've got the 3 most important things. They have the brain, they have the heart, and they have the physical talent to be unstoppable. And so you just want to kind of give them all the info and then step aside.
That's great. So what's your biggest piece of advice to somebody who's not just trying to sound like their mentors or their heroes? Somebody doesn't, if there's, like, I hear a lot of people, I get asked questions online a lot about this, people that are in college that have the technique, that have worked out the thing, but maybe spent a little too much time working their scales and arpeggios, and they can't seem to find their own sound. They can't seem to find their own voice. They're having a hard time doing that.
That is really, really hard. I'm not sure I got a good sentence or soundbite for that. I could tell you a funny story once when I was taking lessons from Lenny Tristano, and I didn't really belong there, but Lenny was great. He really helped me in so many different ways. And anyway, the situation in his house there, you wound up waiting in this teeny little room with a lot of other students all the time because Lenny was never on time. And I got invited to a Lenny Tristano student party. And I didn't know any of these people at all, and I didn't look like them at all either. I was still like Motorcycle Boots, Black Sabbath, Zeppelin. That's kind of like where I was at the time. Mm-hmm. And these guys were not quite Deadheads, but they looked like somewhere between bebop and Deadheads. And they had this party, and I just remember sitting there for a few hours watching all of them play, and they were all brilliant, but they all were imitating Lenny. It was the same thing. Everyone would sit down at the piano and do da 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 da. And it was beautiful, breathtaking. But I'm like, where's this going? Like, they just sound like a junior version of what Lenny did in like 1940.
Yeah.
So, and it just didn't seem right to me. But there's a lot of that goes on, and sometimes you think, well. There's nothing wrong with, first of all, with anything. There are no rules. There's no negative to it, because really what it is, it's just music being celebrated. Mm-hmm. But if you refine your question to say, what's your advice to someone who wants to get a job playing music, then it's a different story. Because let's say, it's your Aunt Betty and she doesn't want a job playing music. Maybe she's a lawyer and she's got a job, but when she comes home, she wants to play like Monk. So your advice to her would be quite different than if, Betty was your twin sister and she said, man, I need a gig.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It would be very different, right? So I often think about that, and I thought about that a lot when I was teaching, because there would be the 8-year-old, and of course they don't have a care in the world, and they would come in and put their plastic model on the top of the amp and then pick up their guitar and play. Then there'd be Kirk Hammett, and he had some specific needs right away because he was making a record or going on tour, and he wanted to understand something. Mm-hmm. And then I'd have a guy who was a race car driver who'd come in and just had a bad day at the track or something, and he just wanted to relax. So how could I possibly come up with the same advice for those three people?
Yeah, that's a great point. For those people that are like the Kirk Hammetts, like the Steve Vais, the Larry Lalondes in training right now, the Charlie Hunters out there that have yet to be discovered, what is it about a guitar player like that? What is it that makes a guitar player iconic?
I think that the some of the coolest things that I've witnessed on stage, especially during the G3 concerts, is just the guitar players having this confidence to walk out on stage and invite danger, the danger of the moment. And it's come from so many different sources. Like you wouldn't think that John Petrucci and Robert Fripp and Kenny Wayne Shepherd and Uli John Roth, Steve Vai, Yngwie would have things in common, but the one thing they all have in common is that they're not afraid to walk on stage and not know what's going to happen. Literally not know what the other guy's going to throw at them over and over again in front of a couple of thousand people. Mm-hmm. Not everyone is comfortable sitting next to a couple of people who are going to shred them to death, and it's going to happen. You're not going to be the best guy every night. You'll miss a beat or whatever, and the guy next to you is just having a great time. So those moments really make me think that there's got to be some kind of training for that in a way, because we all have the same information available to us, especially today, right now in 2020. Anything that you and I can think of, there's got to be a million websites that have it up.
It's insane. Yeah, it's amazing.
Yeah, people are showing it and displaying it. And but the way that you absorb it and the way that you say, I got this, and you walk out on stage and you say, I'm going to just stand next to whoever, whomever, I think is the right way to syntax there. And I'm just going to see what happens. I don't know how it's going to be thrown at me. Am I standing next to Steve Vai? Am I standing next to Cory? I don't know. Like what's he going to throw at me? What kind of shape, and how am I going to respond? There needs to be some kind of training for that. So I tend to tell even the youngest students, like, don't practice exercises to death, because you'll never no one will ever pay to see you do it. And plus you'll just get good at it, and no one wants to hear that. People need music, and we're musicians, so it's our job to make music for people. And so think about that. Like if you're doing something that doesn't lead to playing music for people to make them feel good, or to help them commiserate, or whatever it is that they're using you for, then it's probably pretty useless beyond like 10 minutes. Like, so yeah, you got some weird geometric shape that makes you feel all bent out of shape when you do it. You can go ahead and have fun with it, but for God's sake, don't play it more than 10 minutes in a day. We all have a very short amount of time to practice, so make sure you do stuff that leads to playing music for people and, lifting their spirits in some way. And that kind of, it's a gentle reorientation of it. It gets you out of the school mentality, gets you out of the sports mentality. And then I tell them something that they generally never like to hear, which is I tell them there's no reward for good behavior. And that usually freaks them out. But I just have to tell them you could be the best student in the world, and the total fuck up next to you is the guy who gets the hit single. It's just one of those things. So don't think that there's a reward for practicing and moving that metronome, one click higher. There actually isn't. It's
well, I think it's about connecting with people and connecting with an audience on a human level as well.
That's the only thing. That is the only thing. Actually, that is the only thing, because everything else will get learned. You know that. Anything that you do, that you post on YouTube, will be learned by a 7-year-old somewhere in the world in less than 24 hours. And, and then it reminds you, like, oh, that's right, it's not the technique, right? Because anything can be learned and mastered, and they'll do it better than you. Because, if you're 20, you're already old.
Yeah.
Really. Well, young people have got so much physicality going for them, and they have such a great tunnel vision. It's just sort of, muscles, tendons, nerves, hormones. What else they got to worry about,
And the entirety of human knowledge up until this point is accessible at our fingertips with the internet.
It's really exciting, because it just means that this whole thing has been accelerated. But it will. I think it will take. I mentioned this before, about noticing a student's limitations. And sometimes it's their limitations is shared with their knowledge that they have limitations. And with what it is that they want to accomplish. And so, and I saw that in teaching that, like sometimes there would be. Kirk Hammett would come in and he'd say, this chord progression does not fit anywhere. How do I develop a solo over a chord progression that's never in one key, and still make it rock, right? And then David Bryson would come in and he'd say, I just really need to understand keys and how chords can fit in one key and what key complements the other. And please, I'm not interested in scales and soloing. You know what I mean? And you have two different bands there, right? That, that are represented in these two players, but they have the same drive.
Yes.
That, you know what I mean? It's really admirable. They know what they want. They know what they like. They're ready to work as hard as they can possibly work. It just so happens they are in different scenes like you can't imagine,
Totally. Well, you had also talked a little bit about, and first off, you seem very self-aware, which is cool. And I think that actually speaks a lot about the way you play and the way that people connect with your music. You have a very human element to the way that you talk about music, and that actually just translates in when you play it. An element of that I would love to hear you talk about, because you've played with so many different musicians, you've played with so many different guitar players with different personalities, in a role of leadership and in a role of being a supporting person or a collaborator. The thing I'm wondering about is how you approach collaboration when it's not everybody like, hey, yeah, we're down for this together, but when there is the presence of a strong ego on the stage or in the room. How do you personally, either, I guess, for lack of better terms, how do you deal with that? And how do you kind of disarm that moment? And like it would be good. I think some people just need to hear that word from you of like, hey, don't be a prick, or what do you have to say to the ego side of things?
Yeah, every situation you find yourself in where that pops up, it's new and it's different. So I don't think there's one answer for that. We've certainly, over the years in making albums, first of all, had to deal with that. And usually because it's in a more private setting, you can take somebody aside and say, you're a dick and, you're screwing this up and stop doing that, When you're in a public situation, like with the G3 shows, that's kind of difficult. And I find as a leader of a tour, when you find yourself in a position like that, everything is from the top down. The whole vibe of the tour just starts with you. So you do have to be very careful that you're not reactionary. And keep in mind that sometimes a good idea comes from the worst person, which, you don't want to admit it, right? When the screw up comes up with the great idea, but you have to be selfless like that. You have to realize, okay, this might be, this is coming from a bad place, maybe at the wrong moment, but maybe there's something to it. And you got to check yourself. I think, don't you? No matter what, even if you're in charge, you just got to always check yourself to make sure you're not the one that's being the dick.
Yeah, one thing that I've noticed too with playing with other musicians is the ones that have the least amount of ego are the ones that have the most, they're most in tune with their voice. Somebody like Charlie Hunter. He and I are both such rhythm section groove junkies. Like when he and I sit down and play together, we can just jam and just play rhythm and just work off of each other because we have such a different thing, but it's also kind of in the same, like he has such a unique thing with, obviously with the bass and comping at the same time. And I have a percussive rhythmic thing. So our rhythmic styles blend well, but in a lead setting, like with a bunch of lead players, it can kind of get interesting on how to do that. But I do notice that the guys that are more secure in their own voice are just like, yeah, man, I'm just happy to do what I do. Some people are going to connect with what I do. Some people are going to connect with what you do. And it's hard to even quantify what's better. Like, sure, some people are like nailing their lines better one night over the next. But I think the reality is that sometimes people connect with soaring lyrical lines and some people connect with super fast shredding lines.
Yeah, yes. Well, when I was starting G3 and everybody said no, the managers and artists alike, the way I explained to them was this. I said, look, everyone in the audience has already decided who their favorite is, and there's nothing that you can do that's going to change your mind.
That's, again, very self-aware. I love that. Go on. Sorry.
So I'd say, let's just start from there. So when we come out, we're not selling the latest single. We're not pushing our latest guitar or whatever it is that we're trying to do. Actually, that part of the show's over. Now we can go out and connect with the audience to say, let's celebrate the guitar together. Audience, musicians, everybody lets their guard down. Everybody starts to show more of their roots because they don't have to project their image that they're trying to sell along with all their partners, the record company and the manufacturers and everything. So I would try to sell it to them as a kind of that they can relinquish all this anxiety that's tied up with coming out with a new album and everything in their image, and just relax and just have fun and see what happens. And that I'm not out to shred anybody. And, there are rules. Everybody gets a certain amount of time to play. It's all equal. It's all fun. And just look at me. And when it starts to get repetitive, I'll cue the song back in and there we go. And after that first gig we did with Eric Johnson and Steve Vai, both of them came back and they were like, now we get it.
Yeah.
But I could understand before it happened, they didn't really know that it was going to happen, that they would get this love from the audience that was so unique to what it was that we were presenting, that was going to be so different than what they get when they're just doing their presentation of their latest album. That's a whole different thing, But the audience appreciates so much that we would do that we would show them all the funny little things in our musical closet, that we picked up over the years. And that's what happens when you go and you start playing material that they've never seen you play before, and that you're sharing. And they see so much of what we do, and we're immune to it. It's just gone by us. We're working, but they're taking it all in at once, and they're standing next to each other, and they're having fun, and they're in a location, and you know what I mean? It's such a big experience for the audience, and you need to tap into that,
Yeah.
That's great. And when I think about all those G3 tours, there are so many of them. Like when when the way that you talk about the guitar in the 90s, it sounds to me like in the 90s, you had all these cats, and for, the last 20, 30 years, you've had all these cats that were like yourself, that were ambassadors for the guitar in that era. And now you guys, many of you have become icon status, where it's like, you're the legends. You're the ones that all of us, as like now, kind of like I'm feeling like for myself, like falling into this role as an ambassador for the guitar to my generation, and for right now trying to figure out like, oh, there's so much music that's gone electronic, but there's a lot of music that does work well with guitar, and the guitar still is an important thing in music. As an ambassador for the guitar now, speaking to a guitar icon yourself, what do you have to say, and what advice do you have for those of us that are like, the guitar is cool, everybody should use it, for those of us that are trying to continue to keep it in the zeitgeist, if you will?
Yeah, that's quite a request. I mean, I don't know what you can do. I don't think you can do anything about that. I remember, being in the studio in '95 and in a moment where I was pondering something, which way to go. Glenn Johns said to me in his wonderful accent, he goes, Joseph, it's not your job to decide what people will like and what people will not like. It's your job to play your bloody guitar. So go out there and play your bloody guitar. It was just a really good kick in the ass just to get out there and just don't think about the consequence.
Yeah.
And that it's, what you just said kind of reminds me of it, because you can't plan these things out. You can't say, I'm going to wear the black jeans and the red glasses, and I'm going to play this. Yeah. I'm going to stretch fingers like that, and everyone's going to go, yes. Cory has shown us the way. You can't make people, drink the Kool-Aid. It's just, it may seem like you can, but you can. And it's pathetic to think that you would live your short life that way. Musicians, it's a tough life anyway, just finding work and keeping working and everything. And to waste your time thinking that you can please people by figuring something out. I mean, you just can't, it's not figurable. Figurable. Is that a word? Figure-outable.
Yeah, it works now, yeah.
I think it's wasted energy.
Totally.
I remember I was doing a signing at a NAMM show once, and this young woman came up to me and she said, like, oh, I want to know, like, the secret. How did you do it? And how did you reach all these people? And I'm thinking, like, wow, she is asking me these questions, and there is no answer that's a mechanical answer. Like, do 60 push-ups every day, get a good lawyer, get a good haircut, play a Fender guitar, whatever it is that you might come up with or something. And I just said, nobody knows what's happening on the planet. Nobody knows why we're here. Everyone is looking to everybody else to explain life to them. We just need to hear everybody else's story so that we can get a handle on just what the fuck is going on. And I said, everybody wants to hear your story. So don't copy somebody else's story. Don't echo what's, what is hip, what's fashionable. You have to work on telling your story the way that, the way you see life because of who you are and the life you've lived, and put that into music and tell us that story.
Yeah, and that seems to be, again, just an overwhelming thing of coming back to being you. For you, it's just being Joe. I don't know what it is to be me, but I'm just going to be me and play like me. I don't know when people ask me to play like me. I just do it. And I think what's funny is like, people ask those sort of questions, but it might seem absurd for us as musicians to think of the same question regarding other fields of art. Like, how can I be Pablo Picasso? How can I be Salvador Dali? Or how can I, it's like, well, that's a totally different thing. And if you think about trying to paint or sculpt like them, just because you have the same tools or use the same practice techniques, your stuff's just going to look way different. And the same thing for music. And I think sometimes if we can think about art in those ways, think about different forms and expressions of art, it can really drive home how absurd it is to just try to be somebody else, because it's not going to be that. And the best thing just being like, and the most iconic visual artists, the most iconic musicians are those people that have just come up with their own thing, their own identity in their artistic expression.
Absolutely. Last year when we were out doing the Hendrix tour, the whole thing, being immersed in playing those Hendrix songs, first of all, was just so wonderful and crazy anyway, because the songs were so light, so few parts, and yet recreating that magic that Jimmy did was just like some kind of odd alchemy. It was so mysterious, so much fun. And then we're out there, and Dick Dale had passed away, and I started to really get deep into his life story, and I thought, wow, what an unusual story. What an unusual history, family history, that led him and his music to where it has arrived today and how people see it. You just can't figure that. You can't dream that stuff up, and even could he. He was just living it, and he just did what was him, what was part of his background, and it led him to become an icon and to represent a particular style. He didn't sit down and think about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With a legal pad and a pencil, and say, okay, now this is how I become an icon over several decades. He was just trying to survive and have fun at the same time while playing his guitar. And he had his own challenges. It again and again, life illustrates itself to me that the art of being original is actually just being yourself, and you couple that with the ideas that you understand there's probably no reward for good behavior, and but it's a good idea to be prepared for luck. And that's another thing that's extremely important to tell students of the instrument and the entertainment industry, that you need to be prepared for luck. As silly as it may seem, it's like a little kid laying out their clothes for school, the night before. It seems like a silly thing, like where your clothes are. It's not like you're going to forget in the morning, right?
Yeah.
But why do you lay it out? Well, to be prepared, right? So, but a musician, same way, right? Before they go to a gig, they go, okay, I got 7 picks, I got an extra pack of strings, I got an extra cable in case you prepare. And when you look at your whole life as a musician, as a composer, you ask yourself, am I prepared for that phone call? Like, what if Cory calls me and he says, come down to the gig, you got anything? And you go, shit, I didn't work on anything. I'm not prepared to show off, but we have to. It's called show business for a reason. So we're supposed to be prepared to show off,
Yeah. Well, and I think also for those musicians that are in college that really want to get their thing going, and it's like, yeah, can you come out on tour with me for 3 months? They're like, whoa, I got to be away from home for 3 months. It's like, well, what did you think was going to happen when you spent all that time, working on that thing and trying to get a tour? This is what touring is.
Yes. Wow. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy. But, getting your head around all the things that will present you as a musician, it's an ongoing thing. There's no way to fully prepare for life other than to be ready to spring into action.
Yeah,
and
totally.
always to think, what's the most positive way that I can respond to this? It's always going to be the right way to do it.
Yeah. I have one last question for you, one last topic, because as I look at your career, as I look at your breadth of work, the type of touring you've done, solo touring, G3, the types of events you've put together, the types of collaborations you've put together, it suggests to me that you know what you're doing when it comes to business and industry. And you have probably surrounded yourself with a team or a handful of people that are trusted in helping with those decision-making things. You put out your first album, I guess, over 30 years now, which is incredible. The industry has changed so much since then. If you were to get going right now, you had all the skill, all the wisdom, and all the knowledge that you have of the industry and how things work. Let's pretend that you still have all that. It's just that nobody else knows you yet. You're at 0 followers on Instagram. You're at 0 YouTube subscribers. You're at 3 people showing up to your gig just because they walked up to the door. What are your first few steps? What is that? How do you get your trajectory started? And what would that look like for you today?
You got to have something to show people and to listen to. And so you got to make something, first of all.
Yeah.
I would, I think back to outside the Squares rehearsal barn, and there was a big dumpster for the Nolo Press, and they had all those how-to books with tear-out sheets for starting businesses and whatever. And I took one of them home, and I started a record company and a publishing company, and I put out a record when there was no request for any of it. Mm-hmm. And taught myself how to do books. I became a record executive overnight, and eventually through this magazine called Sonic Option, I wound up having to just mail my record around the world, and just told record stores, just sell it, and if you can, or play it, do whatever you want with it. You don't owe me any money. And so I learned that sometimes you got to give away stuff for free, but you still have to put in the work, and you got to take the chance. You have to be productive. And back then in 1984, I can't believe it was that long ago, and Rubina Records put out my first EP with no drums, bass, or keyboards on it, that most people played at the wrong speed because I was an idiot, not to make it more clear. It was a great step forward in me just, putting who I was forward and not trying to blend in with the crowd. So, the way that I see the parallels with today is that you got these great platforms, social media. It's completely democratized, and but the biggest problem is you wind up being a drop in the largest, proverbial ocean of entertainment, whatever people have ever seen. So how do you stand out? And once again, by being like other people, you're doing yourself a disservice. And
100%.
So you have to be original. But let's put it this way: if you have decided to play out of time and out of tune, most likely you will get fewer people enjoying your music rather than if you were playing in tune and in time. That's just a little observation that I've noticed listening to music for that's been written for the last 400 years, that, people get kind of bugged out when it's out of time, it's not grooving, and if it's out of tune and in the wrong key. I used to tell people when people used to ask me about scales and how to hit the right note and stuff, and I'd say, well, let's say you're writing for a score, and I play. I'm like, the last time I did this, Steve and I were on stage, and I asked Steve to play an E chord, and I said, there's a little scene in a movie, and a baby's taking its first steps walking down the hallway towards you, and you could play these notes. And of course, I just played some notes in the E major scale. And I said, let's just imagine that the baby is covered in blood, and it's holding a kitchen knife, and it's coming towards you. I said, now what do I play? And of course, I played all the wrong notes, and it fits the scene very well. And so when you think about how music is used in films, you can see in a overt way how it's going to work in, let's say, a club. So if you are making music for a dance club and your track comes on and it's not in time, it's just going to fail. It's going to be like the baby with the bloody kitchen knife walking towards you with, cross eyes or something. It's just going to make you feel very uncomfortable. And if you're playing in a blues club and everything is on the beat and nothing's sagging and dragging and there's no questionable thirds, people are going to think it's got no soul in it. So, you have to really think about the reality that music is made for people in particular contexts. And so when you hit that social media thing, you think about what it is you're trying to do. It's so important. To answer your question directly, I would, yes, get that Instagram, TikTok thing happening. I'm not sure what's happening with Facebook, but every couple of years there's a new platform that seems to be taken off. But reach your audience, know your audience, reach them, and do it the right way. Don't do it the wrong way. In terms of the music and the timing and all that kind of stuff. I think it's obvious when you're in the middle of a musical trend. You know best what your audience is going to like, and so if you're doing some kind of crazy math rock, well, make sure it sounds like the right thing. It's going to push the buttons properly.
Well, and I think that might be more obvious to you. Some people do take the approach of, oh yeah, if I just sound like these other people, then I can kind of get in and then I can do my own thing. But I think you're right in finding a way to make yourself sound unique amongst the entire ocean of possible. Like, there are hundreds of thousands of amazing guitar players online. What makes anybody want to listen to me? Being aware of that audience, I think, again, speaks to your big picture thinking and your awareness that not everybody thinks about. So that is a great word on that, is like just knowing who you want to reach and what type of audience your music is going to connect with.
Yeah, the connection thing is, wow. I had to look at a bunch of younger players playing my music the other night for some sort of contest in Korea or something, and it reminded me again that when these young kids play music of mine, the technicality is great. In many ways they've overcome all my issues with my anatomy, and they're just playing technically the stuff better. But what it's missing is the reason why I wrote it and why I played it and what was going through my heart the day that I recorded it. It's just completely not there, and it kind of falls flat. It kind of ruins the moment. And so this, in a way, it's a kind of a proof, or it bolsters my feeling that people telling their own story and putting their heart and soul into their performance is going to be picked up by the audience. And when it's simply copied by somebody else, which it will be once it becomes popular, it will always miss that thing. And that's why when David Gilmour plays Comfortably Numb, it will always be better than the rest of us doing it. It just will always be better. And it may not be as in time or in tune or have the right amp at the right moment, and no matter what we do to model everything about what he did, it will never be as good as when he does it, because he's not doing it. Yeah. So if you turn that around, you say, oh my God, I've got all this power. I'm the only one who's me. So you know what I mean? It's like I've got emotional integrity, authenticity. I've got all the ammunition to make my music sound better than anybody else who's ever going to play it. I truly believe in that.
And that is what will keep us from a true robot takeover.
Yeah, well, yeah. Although right now, robot takeover sounds pretty good. Just until they figure out what's going on with the virus, a little robot takeover, just clean us up.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for your time, Joe. It's really fun to hang here, at least over Skype, and I hope that we get to hang in person sometime and play music. We got to play some guitar together.
That would be great. You are so funky. It's ridiculous.
Oh, thank you,
Crazy.
man.
Ha! Oh! Wow. Tell you what, right there. That's the visceral reaction of hearing one of your heroes give you a really nice compliment on the guitar. That felt good. That felt good. But you know what? This ain't about me. It's about all of us. And I am excited that we now have on the record some encouragement and some wisdom from Satch himself. I'm somebody who's always been in search of my voice, and I feel like in the last couple years I've been able to find my voice on the instrument, find my voice in music and in life, and that's fun to hear about Joe's thing and his encouragement to you guys. So you can take some of the things he said to heart. Hopefully you guys are finding out who you are as a person and as a musician and as a guitar player in that order. Okay? That's it. I'm not going to go into a spiel about it. I will see you guys next week when we have John Schofield